And joining us now are two people who spent even more time inside that courthouse, a lot more time. Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel, former senior member of the Mueller probe, and an MSNBC legal analyst, and MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. So, Andrew, first to you. Take it 30,000 feet view of all of this. What is this verdict, what we've seen for the last 6 more and plus weeks, 7 weeks now, verdict, the response? You've now heard a response from Donald Trump and from President Biden. These are the two candidates. That's not going to change. What does that tell you about where we are as a country and the respect for law? And what are the danger zones ahead?
So the hard part of this is that all of us at this table saw the trial. We were there. We witnessed it. We could see who was called as a witness. We saw the cross-examination. The witnesses were, in large part, allies of Donald Trump. It was David Pecker, who was not really cross-examined and called a liar by Donald Trump. So that one of the witnesses, who is the leadoff witness, one of the most damaging witnesses, one of only 2 witnesses, the jury said, we'd like a read back. That is somebody aligned with Donald Trump. And at no point during the lengthy defense summation did they say David Pecker's a liar. Don't believe him. And yet they don't like the result. And suddenly, first we went from, the election was rigged. Now the trial's rigged. I'm reminded of when Hillary Clinton said, when he didn't get an Emmy, he was like, the Emmys are rigged. I mean, it is like, if you lose, it's rigged. If you win, it's fair. And so this is just the same leitmotif again and again. But what's hard is that we were all there. And so we know, in fact, that the judge was fair. We know that the witnesses were, as they should be, had to testify on direct and be subject to lengthy cross-examination. And this is a jury decision of 12 New Yorkers where Donald Trump used to live and lived for many, many years. So it certainly is his peers.
The jury was the seriousness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all saw it. When they came in on the last day for the jury instruction, and I was in there, didn't look at Donald Trump, looked straight ahead, looked at the entire time, either looked at Juan Merchan or were taking notes. There was a sense of seriousness, of purpose, no distraction, no looking around. This was, it seemed to me, almost a lesson of the power of the people that 12 ordinary Manhattanites, and I know Donald Trump doesn't think they're ordinary. They think that they came in against him. But 12 people who gave up their days and weeks and privacy now because they believe in the system.
Yeah, and you know who else believes in the system, or at least he believed in the system a few days ago? It's Todd Blanche, who opened his summation by exalting the power of the jury, starting by thanking them for their time and their attention, and then reminding them that the decider ultimately of the facts in the case was not the judge or a group of judges, but them. And yet, last night, there he is on CNN saying that always it was clear to him that his client was never going to get a fair trial. And when he was pressed on that by the host of the program, he ultimately said what was unfair about it was the veneer, meaning where the trial was situated here in Manhattan. Not anything wrong with those 12 particular jurors. He still can't bring himself to criticize those 12 particular people. He won't criticize the process. It's just there's something fundamentally about the water in this city, apparently, that doesn't suit them.
And he seemed to be blaming his client because we had all inferred, with a lot of reason to do that Donald Trump was influencing the way his defense was organized, decisions that were made, Robert Costello being put on the stand, for instance, which was clearly a big mistake. And he said that himself in an interview, which I thought was strange. It was an interview on Fox, to suggest that, well, that was the defendant's fault. I mean, he's the lawyer.
But
and I don't know how much longer, Katie, you referred to this earlier, as they head down to Florida because they have some pretrial hearings before Judge Cannon on the Mar-a-Lago documents case, how much longer he will be the lawyer.
Yeah, Alina Habba is still his lawyer, and she helped lose him half $1 billion. Answer that, Lisa.
Look, I think Todd was in between a rock and a hard place in answering that question because of who his particular client is. If he takes ownership of all of those decisions, you also have on the other side as your client somebody who is famously micromanagerial, who has a fragile ego, who wants to have been entrusted with all the decisions in the case. And of course, ethically, your client is allowed to direct their defense. And so I feel for him in that moment, because had he taken it all on himself, not only is that probably inaccurate, but he also may have faced even greater client complaints. What do you mean you made all these decisions yourself? I'm the mastermind of my own defense. And that's a client who still believes that his defense was probably the right one and will be vindicated on appeal. I don't share that opinion, but I think that's Donald Trump's genuine one.
And the thing that really struck me, Andrew and Lisa, was him saying that he was gagged, therefore he didn't testify. He seemed to conflate those things when we all know he had every opportunity. He was given the chance. It was made very clear. The judge, in fact, in open court, made sure that he agreed with that, and he nodded.
Yes, absolutely. He had made that comment early on. The judge in court, as you pointed out, corrected him. And then Donald Trump, in his, as he's wont to do at the end of court days, actually said that. So this was just going back to, this is like facts don't matter. This is really Earth 2. Just so everybody understands that Donald Trump had a right to testify. It was stressed by the judge that he could have hopped on the stand and testified any day of the week. And it was his choice not to do that. So, and he doesn't, just to be clear, at trial, he has an absolute right not to testify. What he doesn't have a right to do is say outside of court, oh, I didn't have an opportunity to do that. He had an opportunity to testify. He had an opportunity to cross-examine David Pecker. He had an opportunity to cross-examine Hope Hicks. Both of those witnesses provided devastating evidence as to him. They were not cross-examined to say that they were lying. There was a choice he made. And so now to say, don't believe the process, these were, in many ways, his allies giving the most damning evidence.
We talked the other day about how I called this a novel case. You said that it wasn't a novel case. Ellie Honig, our friend, used to work here, now works at another network, former federal prosecutor. He argued in New York Magazine today that this was really a bespoke case, that these charges were tailored for one particular defendant, and that is Donald Trump. He talked about how the judge gave a small amount of money to a Democratic group, but that still is against the rules. He shouldn't have done it. He talked about how District Attorney Alvin Bragg ran in some ways as a man who would go after Donald Trump. He understands the arguments that Donald Trump and his team are making, that this was not fair. When you went through this Ellie Honig argument about how this case could be ripe for appeal and the way that it was tailored to Donald Trump, I guess, what's your opinion on that? How do you see it, Andrew?
Yep. So I think this is fair. It's useful to go through these, and so I'm really happy you're raising them, but let me just give you some quick responses that you would hear. First, on the money, there's no question that Juan Merchan should, we're talking about something.
$34.
It's
very small.
It is de minimis.
$35.
He shouldn't have done it. That has been adjudicated, and it's one where they said there's no reason to get off the case for that.
They being the ethics panel.
Sorry, yes. And
he was randomly chosen for the case, the way Aileen Cannon was in Florida.
Absolutely. And also, again, that's where I would say all of us were in that courtroom. Does anyone, we were saying this before we knew what the verdict was, that this was a fair process. We were making sure that all of our viewers knew, in case this was an acquittal, that this was a fair process. So it happens to have been a conviction. So,
but what about the charges and the way that they elevated it from a misdemeanor to a felony?
Sure. So with respect to, can I just do the Bragg comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Because that's simply not the case. It is missing the number one thing that the DA did when he took office, which is to say, I am not bringing this case. It is not ready. And he took enormous flack. And now, you know what? He has a right to he had a right to say, I told you so at that press conference, and he didn't. He took the high road. This is a man who it is. What you see is what you get. This is somebody who's the real deal. When the case wasn't ready, he said no. So, that is the clear, factual response to that.
I want to ask you really quickly about Alvin Bragg, because he made a choice today and last night not to do any interviews. He made a statement. He didn't take any questions. Unlike The defense attorney, who was on multiple networks, answered lots of questions. I wonder what you think is happening there.
I think they have different roles. And I think that the prosecutor, without, I would say is much more in the sort of Jack Smith, Bob Mueller mode of I'm going to speak in court. And even though he had a right to, and he said, you know what, this is an ongoing process and I'm not going to do it.